expensive perfume and whispered voices. That's what betrayal smells and sounds like when you're standing outside your mother-in-law's study, frozen in place, hands still raised to knock. I didn't mean to eavesdrop. But sometimes life's most devastating moments arrive wrapped in the most mundane packages. Mark deserves better than that woman, Helen's voice slithered through the gap beneath the door. Emily, dear, you're exactly what this family needs. Young, ambitious, and most importantly, manageable. A younger woman's laugh, light and practiced. Helen, you're too kind. But Mark is married, and Rose is pregnant. Pregnancies can be complicated, especially at her age. And marriages? Well, they end all the time. I'm Rose. Until this moment, I thought I was living a fairly decent life. Engineering consultant, married to Mark Mitchell for 3 years, and 5 months pregnant with our first child. Now I stood in my in-laws' hallway, learning that my mother-in-law was actively plotting to replace me with someone named Emily. My fingers pressed against my belly, an instinctive gesture of protection. The baby kicked, as if sensing my distress. The timing is perfect, Helen continued. Rose's hormones are making her unstable. Mark's already noticed, I've made sure of that. A few more carefully placed comments about her emotional state, some concerns about her ability to handle motherhood. And you think he'll leave her? Emily's voice held a note of skepticism. Men are simple creatures, dear. Show them a better option while their current one appears to be falling apart. Well, nature takes its course. I should have burst in. Should have confronted them. Instead, I backed away silently, my designer heels, a gift from Helen last Christmas, not making a sound on the plush carpet. The front door closed behind me with a soft click. I made it to my car before the shaking started. My hands trembled so badly, I dropped my keys twice before managing to unlock the door. Inside the car, I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The late afternoon sun painted everything in deceptively warm hues, including the Mitchell family's sprawling Victorian home. 3 years I'd been coming here for Sunday dinners, trying to please a woman who'd apparently been plotting my downfall the entire time. My phone buzzed. A text from Mark, everything okay? Mom said you were supposed to stop by to discuss the baby shower. Of course she did. Helen probably timed it perfectly, wanting me to walk in on that conversation. A test, maybe. Or just another way to torture me. I typed back, got called away for work emergency. Rain check? The response came quickly, no problem, honey. Mom's disappointed but understands. Dinner tonight? Mom's disappointed. How many times had I heard that phrase? How many times had Mark unconsciously sided with her, making me feel like I was failing some impossible standard? The baby kicked again, harder this time. My hand returned to my belly, and suddenly everything crystallized with perfect clarity. This wasn't just about me anymore. Helen Mitchell wasn't just trying to destroy my marriage, she was threatening my child's future, their family, their stability. I started the car, my mind already racing ahead. Helen wanted to play games? Fine. But she'd forgotten something crucial, I solve problems for a living. Complex, technical problems that require patience, strategy, and attention to detail. And now I had a new project, making sure Helen Mitchell never threatened my family again. As I pulled away from the house, I caught a glimpse of Helen in an upstairs window, watching me leave. She raised her hand in a wave, probably believing she'd won this round. Poor Helen. She had no idea she'd just started a war. The Mitchell family dining room always felt like a stage. With its crystal chandelier and antique furniture carefully arranged for maximum dramatic effect. Tonight, watching Helen arrange her sterling silver place settings, I understood why. Every Sunday dinner was a performance, and I'd been cast as the villain without even knowing it. Rose, darling, you're looking a bit peaked. Helen's concern dripped like honey-coated poison. Are you sure you should be working such long hours in your condition? Mark squeezed my hand under the table. Mom, Rose knows her limits. Of course she does. Helen smiled, passing the roast. Though I was reading just the other day about how stress during pregnancy can affect the baby's development. Emily, you remember Emily from church? Was telling me about her sister's terrible experience. There it was. Emily. My fork scraped against the plate, the sound sharp enough to make George glance up from his meal. I don't believe we've met Emily, I said, keeping my voice steady. Perhaps you should invite her to dinner sometime. Helen's eyes flickered with something, surprise? Appreciation? Before she recovered. What a lovely idea. Mark, you remember Emily Carter? She used to babysit for the Hendersons. Vaguely, Mark said, reaching for his wine. Wasn't she the one who went to business school? Harvard Master of Business Administration, Helen beamed. And still single, can you believe it? Such a shame when career women wait too long to start families. My baby kicked, as if recognizing the threat in Helen's words. I pressed my hand against my stomach, drawing strength from the movement. Speaking of careers, George interrupted. Rose, how's that new project going? The one with the sustainable energy company? Before I could answer, Helen cut in. Oh, but surely you'll be taking a step back soon? The Mitchell men have always had stay-at-home wives. It's tradition. Times change, Mother, Mark said, but his tone was light, dismissive. He didn't hear the steel beneath her words, the way each comment was designed to chip away at my place in this family. Some things shouldn't. Helen dabbed her lips with her napkin. Family should always come first. Don't you agree, Rose? I met her gaze across the table. Absolutely. Family is everything. George cleared his throat, an oddly knowing look in his eyes. Helen, perhaps we could discuss something else? Of course, dear. She turned to Mark. Oh, before I forget, the country club is hosting a charity gala next weekend. I took the liberty of getting tickets for you both. Mom, you know Rose has that conference in Boston next weekend. Does she? Helen's surprise was perfectly crafted. But surely she can reschedule? The gala's such an important networking event for your career, Mark. And Emily will be there, she's on the planning committee. She could introduce you to some valuable contacts. The room tilted slightly. I gripped my water glass, watching condensation bead against my fingers. Helen hadn't just been plotting, she'd been orchestrating, creating opportunities, laying groundwork. Actually, I heard myself say, I can probably move some things around. Helen's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Really? But your work is so important to you. Not as important as family. I smiled, matching her saccharine tone. And you're right, networking is crucial. I'd love to meet Emily properly. Something shifted in Helen's expression, a flash of uncertainty, quickly masked. She hadn't expected me to adapt to her game so quickly. Wonderful! Mark grinned, oblivious to the undercurrent. It'll be fun to get dressed up, show off my beautiful wife. As the conversation moved on, I caught George watching me with an odd expression. He'd been unusually quiet tonight, observing rather than participating. When Helen rose to fetch dessert, he leaned slightly toward me. Be careful, he murmured, so softly I almost missed it. She's better at this game than you know. Before I could respond, Helen returned with an elaborate chocolate torte. Rose, you must try this, though perhaps just a small piece? You're carrying rather high, and we wouldn't want you to get any more swollen than necessary. I accepted the slice with a smile, my mind already racing ahead. Helen might be better at this game, but I had something she didn't, nothing left to lose. The email sat in my inbox like a loaded gun. 3 clients canceling major contracts within 24 hours, it couldn't be coincidence. I scrolled through their politely worded excuses, each mentioning concerns about reliability and heard through industry channels. My phone buzzed. A text from Mark: Mom says you missed lunch with her friend Sandra yesterday. Everything okay? Sandra, head of the engineering consortium, who just happened to be one of Helen's oldest friends. I pressed my palm against my desk until it hurt, fighting the urge to scream. 6 years building my reputation, gone in a whisper campaign orchestrated over cucumber sandwiches and bridge club meetings. In a meeting, I texted back. Talk later. My computer pinged. Another email, this time from my biggest client, regarding our upcoming project. The phone rang. Mark again. I let it go to voicemail, unable to trust my voice. He'd want explanations I couldn't give without sounding paranoid. How do you tell someone their mother is systematically destroying your life? A knock at my home office door made me jump. Rose? George's voice, unexpected and hesitant. Have a minute? I quickly minimized the emails. Come in. He entered, looking uncomfortable in the modern space. Helen mentioned you weren't at lunch yesterday. Said Sandra was quite disappointed. Did she? My laugh sounded hollow. Funny, since I was never invited. George's expression shifted. Ah. He settled into the chair across from my desk, studying me with those quiet teacher's eyes. You know, Helen's always been good at stories. Telling them, shaping them. Making them real. Is that what we're calling it now? Stories? What would you call it? I turned my monitor toward him, displaying the cascade of cancellation emails. I'd call it character assassination. He leaned forward, reading quickly. His face aged 10 years in 30 seconds. Christ, Rose. I knew she was. But this. She's trying to make me desperate. Financially dependent. I rested a hand on my swollen belly. Vulnerable. Have you told Mark? What would I say? Your mother's systematically destroying my career because she wants to replace me with Emily? He'd think pregnancy hormones were making me crazy. I laughed again. The sound edged with hysteria. Which is exactly what she wants. George was quiet for a long moment. Helen wasn't always like this. Or maybe she was, and I just didn't want to see it. But after Mark was born, he trailed off, looking older than I'd ever seen him. She has a way of making her reality everyone else's reality. My phone buzzed again. Helen this time, darling, just checking you're still coming to the gala. Emily's so looking forward to meeting you properly. I showed George the message. She's not even trying to hide it anymore. Because she thinks she's already won. He stood suddenly. I should go. Helen will wonder where I am. George? He paused at the door. Why did you really come here today? He turned back, his expression haunted. Because 35 years ago, there was another woman. Someone I loved before Helen. And sometimes I wonder what my life would have been if I'd been brave enough to see the truth sooner. After he left, I sat in my darkening office, his words echoing in my head. The baby kicked, a sharp reminder of everything at stake. I opened my laptop and began typing. Dear Mark. There's something you need to know about your mother. I stared at the words, cursor blinking accusingly. Delete. Helen would make any direct accusation sound like the ravings of an unstable pregnant woman. I needed proof. Real proof. My phone buzzed one final time. An email from Sandra herself. Rose, dear, so sorry you couldn't make lunch. Helen mentioned you've been struggling with the pregnancy. Perhaps it's time to consider stepping back? I know several young engineers who could handle your clients. I closed my eyes, feeling the pieces click into place. Helen hadn't just been planning this for weeks or months. This was years of groundwork, relationships cultivated, stories planted, all leading to this moment. Fine. If Helen wanted to play the long game, I could play too. But first, I had a gala to prepare for. The country club bathroom mirror reflected a woman I barely recognized. Designer dress stretched over my growing belly, pearls at my throat, Helen's idea of proper Mitchell family attire. My hands trembled as I reapplied lipstick, smearing it slightly. You look beautiful. Emily Carter materialized beside me, perfect in midnight blue. Helen showed me your wedding photos. You were radiant. I met her eyes in the mirror. Were? Oh, I didn't mean. She touched my arm, concern radiating from her like expensive perfume. Pregnancy can be so difficult. Especially when you're trying to balance everything else. The bathroom door opened. Helen swept in, resplendent in silver. There you are. Mark's looking for you, Rose. Something about a phone call from Sandra? My stomach clenched. I should go find him. Let me help you with your lipstick first. Helen produced a tissue, dabbing at the smear with maternal precision. We want you looking your best. So many important people here tonight. I escaped into the hallway, heart pounding. The gala's music throbbed through the walls, a counterpoint to my racing pulse. Mark stood by the bar, phone in hand, frowning. Sandra called the house, he said without preamble. Something about you missing meetings? Client complaints? It's complicated. Then uncomplicate it. His voice held an edge I'd never heard before. Because Mom's friends keep asking if you're okay, if the pregnancy's affecting your work, if maybe you're overwhelmed. A waiter passed with champagne. Mark grabbed 2 glasses, handed me sparkling water instead. The gesture, so casual, so controlling, made something snap inside me. Did you ever wonder, I said quietly, why your mother's friends are so interested in my career? What's that supposed to mean? It means, I stopped as George appeared, his face grave. Rose, a moment? He glanced at Mark. Alone, if you don't mind. Mark threw up his hands. Perfect. More secrets. George led me to a quiet corner. Helen's been busy. Board positions, charity committees, she's been positioning Emily for months. Creating opportunities. I know. No, you don't. He pulled out his phone, showed me an email. She's arranged for Emily to take over your biggest remaining client. The contract's already drawn up. The room tilted. I gripped the wall, feeling the rough texture of expensive wallpaper under my fingers. There's more, George continued. She's been talking to divorce lawyers. Gathering evidence of your unstable behavior during pregnancy. Building a case for Mark to get full custody when the baby comes. The pieces clicked into horrible place. Helen wasn't just trying to replace me, she was trying to erase me completely. Across the room, I saw Helen introducing Emily to Mark's business associates. Her hand on Emily's back, proprietary and proud. The perfect future daughter-in-law, already being woven into the fabric of Mark's life. I should have warned you sooner, George said. But Helen. She has a way of making you doubt what you see. What you know. Why tell me now? Because I saw the guest list for next month's baby shower. Emily's not just invited, she's helping Helen host it. He touched my arm gently. Whatever you're planning, do it soon. Before it's too late. The baby kicked hard, making me gasp. Through the crowd, I caught Helen watching us, her expression calculating. She raised her glass in a mock toast. Rose? Mark appeared beside me. Mom wants us all for photos. Family tradition, you know. Family tradition. Everything in its proper place, according to Helen's design. I looked at Mark, my husband, the father of my child, and saw him through new eyes. Not just Helen's son anymore, but a piece in her elaborate game. Coming, I said, straightening my spine. Wouldn't want to disappoint your mother. I followed Mark toward the group, where Helen stood arranging everyone just so, Emily at her right hand. My baby kicked again, a reminder of everything at stake. Time to stop playing defense. Helen wanted a war? Fine. But she'd forgotten something crucial. In chess, the queen is the most powerful piece on the board. And I was done being a pawn. The flash drive felt heavy in my palm, a tiny thing to contain so much destruction. 3 weeks of digging through Helen's carefully constructed world had yielded a treasure trove of emails, financial records, and recorded conversations. Each piece a bullet in my loaded gun. You understand what this means? George asked, his voice barely above a whisper in his study. Helen was at her bridge club, orchestrating more social destruction. If you use this, there's no going back. I plugged the drive into his laptop. Folders appeared, each labeled with meticulous precision: career sabotage, Emily arrangements, custody preparation. She's been planning this for years, I said, clicking through documents. Look, she started grooming Emily back when Mark and I were still dating. George's hand shook as he reached for his scotch. There's something else you should see. He opened a folder labeled Previous Incidents. My throat went dry. 3 other women. All former girlfriends of Mark's. All driven away through carefully orchestrated campaigns of destruction. I knew about Caroline, George said. But the others. Christ, I should have seen it. A new email notification popped up. From Helen to Emily, darling, everything's arranged for the baby shower. Rose won't suspect a thing until it's too late. What's she planning? My voice sounded strange, distant. Does it matter? George closed the laptop. You have enough here to expose everything. The baby kicked hard, making me wince. And destroy Mark in the process. This would ruin his career, his reputation. He deserves to know the truth. Does he? I stood, pacing the study. Helen spent 40 years molding him, controlling every aspect of his life. What if? What if knowing destroys him? George's expression hardened. Then maybe he needs to be destroyed. To be rebuilt into something real. My phone buzzed. Mark, Mom's worried about you. Says you've been acting strange. Maybe we should talk to Dr. Phillips? Another buzz. Helen, just checking on you, darling. Emily mentioned seeing you leave Sandra's office yesterday. Everything okay with work? Final buzz. Emily, we should have coffee soon. I have some concerns about Helen I'd like to discuss. I laughed, the sound bordering on hysterical. She's playing us all against each other. Like puppets on strings. Then cut the strings. George pulled out a manila envelope. These are copies of everything. Bank records, emails, recordings. All the evidence of Helen's manipulations. Use it. It's not that simple. It is. He stood, suddenly looking every bit the teacher he used to be. You're not just fighting for yourself anymore. That baby deserves better than growing up under Helen's control. The baby kicked again, harder this time. As if agreeing. My phone lit up with another text from Mark. Mom suggested we meet with her lawyer tomorrow. Just to discuss some family estate planning. Estate planning. Code for custody arrangements. If I do this, I said slowly, I'll need your help. And it has to be perfect. One mistake and Helen will turn it all against me. George nodded, reaching for the flash drive. Then let's make sure there are no mistakes. I grabbed his wrist, stopping him. Wait. There's something else we need first. I pulled out my own phone, typing quickly, Emily, coffee sounds perfect. Tomorrow? Playing her game? George asked. No. I touched my belly, feeling my child move beneath my hand. Playing my own. Helen thinks she's the only one who can manipulate people? Fine. Let's see how she handles being outplayed at her own game. My phone buzzed one last time. Emily, tomorrow's perfect. There's so much we need to discuss. I smiled, feeling the pieces of my own plan clicking into place. Helen had spent years building her web of manipulation. Now it was time to turn those threads against her. One more thing, I told George. After tomorrow, whatever happens, there's no going back. He nodded gravely. Some things shouldn't go back. They should burn. The Mitchell family dining room had never felt so suffocating. Every piece of evidence lay spread across Helen's prized mahogany table: emails, photos, financial records. A lifetime of manipulation laid bare under the crystal chandelier. Mark stood at the window, his back to us all. He hadn't moved since I'd finished speaking 10 minutes ago. It's all lies, Helen said, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. Rose is clearly suffering from prenatal depression. The doctors warned us about this, remember, darling? Emily shifted in her chair, avoiding everyone's eyes. The recording of her conversation with Helen about the custody arrangements played softly from my phone, filling the silence. Mark, I said, my voice cracking. Please. Say something. He turned, but his eyes went to Helen. Mom? Just that one word, but it held everything: doubt, confusion, plea for denial. Helen saw her opening and pounced. Sweetheart, you know how I've worried about Rose's stability. She reached for his hand. Everything I've done has been to protect you, to protect our family. By destroying 3 other women before me? I pushed forward Caroline's old letters. By planning to take my baby? Mark, she's hysterical, Helen said. This is exactly what I've been warning you about. Stop. George's voice cut through the room. Helen, for once in your life, stop. George, dear, surely you don't believe. I found the divorce papers, he said quietly. The ones you had drawn up for Mark. Dated 3 months after Rose announced her pregnancy. Mark finally looked at the evidence, picking up emails one by one. His hands shook. Emily. You were supposed to replace Rose? I'm sorry, Emily whispered. Helen said it was for the best. That Rose was unstable, that the baby would be safer. The baby kicked hard, making me gasp. Mark's head snapped up at the sound, real fear crossing his face for the first time. The nursery, he said suddenly. Last week, when you were reorganizing. Mom, what did you do? Helen's mask slipped, just slightly. I was only trying to help. Mark bolted from the room. I followed as quickly as my pregnant body would allow, hearing the others close behind. He threw open the nursery door and stopped dead. Everything was gone. The crib, the decorations, all our careful preparations, replaced with Helen's choices. Emily's favorite colors. Helen's approved furniture. It's better this way, Helen said from behind us. More appropriate for a Mitchell heir. Rose never quite understood our family's standards. Get out. Mark's voice was barely a whisper. Darling. Get out. He whirled on her, face contorted. Both of you. Emily, Helen, get out of my house. Mark Mitchell, you will not speak to me that way. Helen drew herself up. Everything I've done has been for you. Rose isn't right for this family. She'll never understand our values, our traditions. Your traditions? I laughed, the sound bordering on hysteria. Like destroying anyone who threatens your control? Control? Mark turned to me, his expression horrifying in its sudden clarity. No. Not control. Ownership. She wants to own everything. Including me. Helen stepped forward, reaching for him. Mark. Don't touch me. He backed away. I can't. I need to think. I need. He pushed past us all, footsteps pounding down the stairs. The front door slammed. Well done, Rose. Helen's voice dripped venom. You've finally managed to drive him away. Just like I knew you would. Helen, George warned. Oh, save it, George. You're as weak as he is. She smiled at me, triumphant despite everything. He'll be back. He always comes back to Mother. And when he does... My water broke. The pain doubled me over, shocking in its intensity. Too early. A month too early. Rose. George caught me as my knees buckled. Helen's smile widened. Perfect timing. Emily, call Dr. Phillips. Tell him we're bringing Rose in. And that she's experiencing another emotional episode. No, I gasped. George, don't let her. SHH, dear, Helen soothed, already pulling out her phone. Mother knows best. And soon, everything will be exactly as it should be. The last thing I saw before the pain overwhelmed me was Helen's face, serene and victorious, as she dialed Mark's number. Hospital fluorescent lights cast everyone in sickly shades of truth. Helen stood at the nurse's station, her perfectly manicured hands gesturing as she spoke in urgent whispers. Dr. Phillips nodded, concern etched on his face. She's been increasingly unstable, Helen's voice drifted over. We're worried about the baby. Another contraction ripped through me. George squeezed my hand, his face grim. Rose? Mark burst through the emergency room doors, wild-eyed. What happened? Mom said. Of course she did. I gritted my teeth through the pain. Did she tell you about the papers she's filing? The ones claiming I'm an unfit mother? His face went blank. What? Mark, darling. Helen glided over, Dr. Phillips in tow. Rose is having another episode. The stress isn't good for the baby. The only stress, George's voice cut through the room like a blade, is you, Helen. She froze. In 15 years of marriage, I'd never seen George directly challenge her. I'm leaving you, he continued, pulling papers from his jacket. And I've already submitted evidence of your manipulation to the hospital board. They know exactly who's causing Rose's stress. Dr. Phillips' expression shifted. Helen saw it, her mask cracking slightly. George, this isn't the time. It's exactly the time. He turned to Mark. Your mother had Dr. Phillips ready to declare Rose mentally unstable. Part of her plan to help you get custody after the birth. Mark staggered back. Mom? Everything I did was for you, Helen snapped, mask finally shattering. Rose will never understand our family, our legacy. She'll poison our grandchild against everything we stand for. Like you poisoned me? Mark's voice was barely a whisper. Like you poisoned those other women? I protected you. You owned me. He moved to my bedside, taking my other hand. But not anymore. Helen's face contorted. You ungrateful. Security, Dr. Phillips called quietly. Please escort Mrs. Mitchell out. You can't do this. Helen backed away as two guards approached. I'm his mother. I'm the only one who truly loves. Love? I pushed myself up, fighting through another contraction. Love doesn't destroy. Love doesn't manipulate. Love doesn't try to steal someone's child. You know nothing about love. She lunged forward, but the guards caught her arms. Mark, please. Everything I did was for you. No. Mark's voice was steel. Everything you did was for control. And you've just lost it all. Emily appeared in the doorway, holding a familiar flash drive. Helen? The board would like to see you. Something about years of falsified medical records and coerced testimonies? Helen's face went ash white. You little traitor. I made you. You tried to make me into you, Emily said quietly. That's why I helped Rose. Because I saw what I could become. The guards began pulling Helen toward the door. She thrashed, her carefully constructed dignity finally shattering completely. Mark! You can't let them do this. I'm your mother. Not anymore, he said, not looking at her. Rose needs to push now. Helen's screams echoed down the hallway as another contraction seized me. Through the pain, I saw George following the guards, divorce papers in hand. One more thing, he called after Helen. The house is in my name. You have until tomorrow to clear out. Hours later, holding our daughter, I watched Mark's face as he counted her tiny fingers. I'm sorry, he whispered. For not seeing it sooner. For almost letting her. SHH. I touched his cheek. We're free now. All of us. Emily knocked softly, entering with George. The board's reviewing everything. Helen's medical license connections, her social circle influence. It's all crumbling. Good, George said firmly. Some things need to crumble before they can be rebuilt. Through the window, dawn painted the sky in new colors. Our daughter stirred, opening eyes that held nothing of Helen's manipulation, nothing of the darkness we'd fought through. What's her name? Emily asked softly. Mark and I exchanged glances. Hope, I said finally. Because that's what survived. What Helen could never quite destroy. George smiled, touching his granddaughter's hand. Hope Mitchell. A new legacy, built on truth instead of control. Outside, the sun rose fully, washing away the last shadows of Helen's reign. Hope's laughter echoed through the renovated nursery as she reached for the mobile spinning above her crib, butterflies instead of Helen's chosen angels. The sound still caught me off guard sometimes, so pure and untouched by all that came before. She's getting stronger every day, Emily said from the doorway. She'd stopped by to drop off the last of Helen's court documents. Just like her mother. I adjusted Hope's blanket, handmade by George. Any word? She's living with her sister in Arizona. The medical board revoked her licenses. Most of her society friends have quietly distanced themselves. Emily moved closer, watching Hope. Though some people say she's already trying to rebuild her influence there. Of course she is. I wasn't surprised. People like Helen didn't change, they just found new territories to conquer. Rose? Mark's voice from downstairs. Sandra's here. I found them in the kitchen, Sandra looking uncomfortable but determined. I owe you an apology, she said before I could speak. I let Helen manipulate me into hurting your career. I've already called my contacts to set the record straight. Thank you. I studied her face, seeing the lingering shame there. How many others did she use like that over the years? Too many. Sandra glanced at Mark. We all thought we were protecting the Mitchell family legacy. We never realized we were just enabling her control. Mark squeezed my hand. The gesture felt different now, not seeking reassurance, but offering strength. The legacy needed breaking, he said quietly. So we could build something real. George entered through the back door, carrying fresh vegetables from his new garden. The house felt different with him here, warmer somehow. He'd taken over the guest house after the divorce, helping us rebuild while healing himself. Emily, he nodded. Staying for dinner? Actually. She hesitated. I'm leaving town. Got a job offer in Seattle. Running away? I asked. Moving forward. She smiled slightly. Helen showed me what I could become. You showed me what I should be instead. Hope's cry from the nursery pulled me away. When I returned with her, Sandra was gone, but Emily lingered. There's something else you should know, she said, watching Hope reach for Mark's finger. Helen called me last week. Offered to mentor me again if I helped her reconnect with Mark. The old fear flickered, but Mark's laugh dispersed it. Let me guess, you recorded the conversation? Added it to the file. Emily touched Hope's cheek gently. Just in case she ever tries coming back. After everyone left, I found George in his garden, tending new growth where Helen's prized roses once dominated. Do you ever regret it? I asked. Exposing everything? Losing the life you had? He looked up, soil staining his hands. That life was built on lies. This one. He gestured to the fresh vegetables, the sound of Hope's laughter drifting from the house. This one's real. Later, putting Hope to bed, I noticed something in her crib, a small angel figurine from Helen's old mobile. Mark found me staring at it. Mom sent it, he said quietly. With a note saying she's sorry, that she wants to meet her granddaughter. What do you want to do? He took the figurine, studying it. Keep it. To remind us. Of what she did. Of what we survived. What we chose not to become. He placed the angel on a high shelf, just visible from Hope's crib. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying your enemy. It's building something they can never touch. I watched Hope drift off to sleep, one tiny hand curled around her butterfly mobile. The angel watched from its shelf, a reminder that darkness doesn't always stay banished. But as Mark's arms wrapped around me, I realized that maybe that's okay. Some battles don't end with complete victory. Some wounds don't heal perfectly clean. But here, in this moment, with Hope's peaceful breathing and Mark's steady presence, I understood something Helen never could. Real love doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be true. The butterfly mobile turned gently in the evening breeze, casting shifting shadows that looked, just briefly, like angels' wings.
I'm Ashley. I'm a 25-year-old architect. While working at a local architectural firm, I spend my days off leisurely reading books, living at my own pace every day. It's hard to imagine now, but my childhood was a tumultuous one. Thinking back to those days, this peaceful and calm life seems almost like a lie. The one who gave me normal happiness was not my biological parents, but my aunt, Doris, who is always cheerful and more loving than anyone else. Today, I want to share my memories with my proud aunt, Doris. Originally, my parents were unusually strict, but their attitude towards me, a child, visibly became colder when I was in the first grade of elementary school. Don't make such a basic mistake. Isn't it embarrassing not to get a perfect score on a first grader's test? I'm sorry. Ugh, how did we end up with such a disappointment as our child? The deep disappointment in my mom's sigh made my heart ache. I was frustrated and sad that I couldn't meet my mom's expectations. I was born in a high-end residential area of a provincial city, the daughter of a doctor dad and a former nurse mom. My dad's family has been doctors for generations. As the daughter born into a family of doctors, I was expected to have a future in medicine from kindergarten and was enrolled in private schools. However, contrary to my parents' and everyone else's expectations, my grades were too mediocre, and I rarely made it to the top of my class. By first grade, I was already falling behind, and my parents were constantly irritated. Still, I wanted my parents to recognize me, so I studied hard at home and in cram schools every day after school. On the other hand, my younger sister, Lindsay, was exceptionally good at academics. Even before she started elementary school, she was studying far beyond me at kindergarten and cram schools. This means that she scored better than me, her elder sister, on the same tests. Of course, my parents were obsessed with the talented Lindsay, pouring most of their money and time into her, and I was forced to quit the cram school before starting the second grade. I was shocked to be abandoned by my parents and tried to redeem myself by studying alone after school and on holidays. My parents only laughed at my efforts, calling me a gloomy recluse who can't even study. Fortunately, my relationship with my sister was good, and she adored me. I was, of course, happy about that, but I still felt pathetic being inferior to my sister. When I entered the second grade and my sister started elementary school, the disparity in treatment worsened. On break, my parents would take my sister to enjoy cultural spots like theaters and museums in the city, while I was stuck at home until dinner. They'd tell me, "It's a waste to give nice things to people who don't understand their worth." My sister always looked guilty, but she couldn't speak up to our parents. Alone in the house, I listened to the joyful voices of other families from outside the window and cried many times. Because I wasn't very smart, my mom and dad didn't seem to care much about me. Thinking that being loved by my parents was everything, I always blamed myself. One day, when my parents decided to take my sister alone to a museum a plane ride away for an overnight trip, they probably thought it was too much to leave me alone for 2 full days. I was woken up early on the day of the trip and was brought to an old apartment in the town next to ours. My dad, looking annoyed, rang the doorbell, and a woman with messy blonde hair opened the door. It was my Aunt Doris, my dad's much younger sister. After exchanging a few words with my dad, he didn't even glance at me and went back to his car alone. Left behind with a big backpack and standing dumbfounded, a sleepy-looking Doris said, "Come in," gesturing towards the room with her chin. I rarely attended family gatherings, so I had only met Aunt Doris properly 2 or 3 times. My dad always warned, "Stay away from her, she's a lowlife who didn't even properly finish middle school." Indeed, with her dyed blonde hair and gray sweatshirt, Aunt Doris honestly looked rough. Despite feeling uneasy about being left with such a person, I sat down on a flat cushion in her small living room. Feeling uncomfortable and fidgety, I suddenly smelled the pleasant aroma of butter. Aunt Doris appeared with a tray carrying pancakes. "You haven't had breakfast, have you?" "Oh, thank you." Tentatively holding a knife and fork, I eat the pancake. The taste of melted butter spreads gently in my mouth. It's delicious. Right? Pancakes are the best in the morning, aren't they? Aunt Doris smiled broadly through the steam. Her smile and the warmth of the pancakes eased my tense heart. For the next 2 days, Aunt Doris took great care of me. Her cream stew and steak were delicious, and I ate heartily. Watching me, Aunt Doris looked happy and kept smiling, saying, "There's more if you want." Aunt Doris also took me to the zoo. "Wow, gorillas are super handsome, aren't they?" she said, genuinely enjoying herself. The zoo trip with her was really fun. From then on, whenever my parents and sister went on a trip, I was always left with Aunt Doris. She always accepted me willingly. I completely let down my guard and grew to love my bright and kind Aunt Doris. She also adored me, saying, "I always wanted a sister like you, Ashley." Meanwhile, although my parents left me with Aunt Doris, they kept bad-mouthing her to me. Apparently, Aunt Doris had been rebellious in middle school and hadn't gone to high school, living a bare minimum life with a low job, according to my dad. "If you don't want to end up like her, don't slack off in your studies," my dad threatened, half smiling while drunk. As a child, I always believed everything my dad said, but I couldn't believe his assessment of Aunt Doris. She was a good person who was great at cooking, why would they speak so ill of her? The discrimination in the treatment of siblings by our parents only got worse. By the time I was in the third grade, they provided me with just enough clothes and food to barely avoid being reported to child services. My parents were well known in town. Nobody would believe they were capable of such cruelty. Locked in my room studying hard, I was told, a recluse is an eyesore, so disappear, and was kicked outside. Whether I studied or not, it was hell. I wasn't allowed to return until it got dark, and with no friends or adults to rely on, I had no choice but to study in parks or libraries. Aunt Doris welcomed me on weekends. She was the only one who worried as my complexion grew increasingly pale. One day, looking me straight in the eyes, she said, "Ashley, if you'd like, why don't you live with me?" Huh? As I was stuffing my face with the fluffy omelet she made, Aunt Doris made an unexpected proposal. Surprised, I froze, and Aunt Doris's cold hand gently stroked my head. "If you find it hard to be at home, let me be your parent. Let's eat together every day like this, lay out the blankets and sleep, and go to the zoo again." Could there be such a dreamlike story? Just listening to it made me swoon. Well, you might not want a dumb parent like me. That's not true. I dislike it when Aunt Doris belittles herself with a laugh, and without thinking, a loud voice escapes me. Her offer is too appealing. But can I really wish for such a thing? Wouldn't I just be a burden to Aunt Doris, who has never married? Wouldn't it be a betrayal of my parents? Is it really okay if I live with you, Aunt Doris? I asked timidly. Yes, of course. Aunt Doris, smiling brightly with a thumbs up, seemed brighter than anything else in the world. I want to be part of Aunt Doris's family. I've made up my mind. Shortly thereafter, Aunt Doris confronted my parents directly. Despite their eagerness to get rid of me, they were reluctant to let me live with Aunt Doris. But I think it was not out of affection, but because of what the neighbors might think. Having to explain why one daughter was missing would be bothersome. After some turmoil, it was decided that I would not officially become Aunt Doris's adopted child but would live with her as a boarder. Once the decision was made, things moved quickly. With just my backpack and a box of belongings, I moved to Aunt Doris's house. On my last day at home, my parents spat out, "Don't slack off your studies. If you become a good-for-nothing like her and cause us trouble, we'll put you in an institution right away." Only my sister seemed shocked that I was leaving. But knowing that her sister was being mistreated, she tearfully sent me off, saying, "I love you, Ashley." Torn by lingering feelings for my parents and my sister's tears, I showed up at Aunt Doris's with a complicated expression. Aunt Doris welcomed me with the brightest smile, saying, "Yay! I'm seriously happy to have Ashley as my family." Determined to become a family worthy of Aunt Doris, I embraced this new life. However, living with Aunt Doris wasn't always smooth sailing. Since parental support was minimal, I had to transfer from a private to a public elementary school. But it was still fun. Whenever I was stuck on my homework, Aunt Doris would ponder the textbooks with me. Even if I didn't score a plus on tests, she'd exclaim, "Eh? That's insane. Way to go, Ashley." Because Aunt Doris recognized me, my personality gradually brightened. Thanks to that, I made friends to play with after school and spent less time studying. Yet, despite studying less, my grades began to soar once I lived with Aunt Doris, maintaining the top of my class as I advanced in school. Most likely, the ongoing stomach pains and feeling sluggish from my parents' stress faded away. As a child, I must have been severely stressed by them. Before I knew it, I was a sixth grader, and as the toxic influence of my parents wore off, I was freed from their narrow views. As my sister advanced in school, she started visiting Aunt Doris's house, sneaking away from our parents' watchful eyes. She remained academically excellent, much to our parents' pride. But she had other interests beyond studying, often confiding her frustrations to me. Whenever Aunt Doris was cooking, my sister would sparkle with excitement, standing next to her to help. 8 years flew by since I started living with Aunt Doris. I went on to study architecture at a state university. I chose the architecture department for a particular reason. Additionally, I received a scholarship grant, so I could attend without needing financial assistance from my parents or burdening Aunt Doris, which made me incredibly happy. On the day I was accepted into my first-choice university, Aunt Doris cried more than I did and made my favorite scattered sushi to celebrate. Then, sipping her celebratory drink alone, she slowly shared her life story with me. Aunt Doris was the result of my grandma's affair, which came to light after her birth. My granddad was furious but raised her as his own child for appearance's sake. Yet, she was ultimately neglected, initially desperate for affection but eventually rebelling. Aunt Doris's parents, my paternal grandparents, are nearly estranged from her. Ashley, you are amazing. You didn't stray from the path like I did, you've grown up so well. At 30, Aunt Doris's youthful wildness had faded, and she looked at me with serene eyes. That's because I had you, Aunt Doris. If it weren't for you, I would be. Imagining a future without Aunt Doris's intervention sent shivers down my spine. Just like 8 years ago, she gently stroked my head. A year into my hopeful college life, people with bloodshot eyes stormed our apartment. It was my parents. Did you two lead Lindsay down the wrong path? What? I responded dumbly to their sudden accusations. What happened to Lindsay? Which medical school is she going to? Feigning ignorance, I watched my parents' faces turn even redder. Don't joke around. You knew, didn't you? Lindsay has. Lindsay has gone off on her own. My dad was too agitated to continue. I knew why they were angry, so I answered them. It seems Lindsay went to culinary school. Yeah, you led her down the wrong path. I hadn't influenced her. Lindsay had pretended to apply to medical schools to appease our parents while secretly applying to a nutrition university. Of course, she was accepted and would start her studies in nutritional science in April, not medical school. You're jealous because you're lowly, and you don't want your sister to become a doctor. You devil. My mom spat at me while accusing me. That's not true. Lindsay chose her own path. Lies. A brilliant child like her would never choose to be a nutritionist. Truth be told, Lindsay ultimately didn't want to be a nutritionist, but I kept that to myself. You never really understood Lindsay. Screech. My mom shrieked like a monkey, stomping her feet. It's all because of you. It's not Ashley's fault. What? From behind me, Lindsay and Aunt Doris appeared at the door. My parents, not expecting Lindsay to be here, were stunned and then became even more agitated, turning their anger towards Aunt Doris. Doris. You're the root cause. You led not only Ashley but also Lindsay astray. That's totally overstepping. As my dad looked ready to strike Aunt Doris, Lindsay stepped forward to shield her. Aunt Doris didn't do anything wrong. She just let me borrow her kitchen since I was excited about cooking. Indeed, Lindsay had grown interested in cooking while visiting Aunt Doris's house to see me, and she became hooked while helping out next to Aunt Doris. Our parents, interested only in Lindsay's grades, hadn't noticed even when she came home smelling of savory sesame oil. Lindsay had considered culinary school, but without a scholarship, she couldn't break away from our parents, so she chose the nutrition department. She received the same type of scholarship as me, which allowed her to defy our parents. Ultimately, she intends to become a chef. Dad's lips trembled with anger. Lindsay. I'll forgive you for taking a gap year, so quit school right now and go to cram school. No way. Lindsay firmly rejects our dad, who can only shout. Watching this, our mom scolds Lindsay with a cajoling tone. Lindsay, nutrition, cooking, these are things anyone can do. It's a waste for someone as talented as you. Everyone wants a person like you to become a doctor. Then can you cook, Mom? What? Can you fry chicken until it's crispy? Do you know how to make bechamel sauce? That's. Mother can't. She's disastrous at cooking, relying on department store basements and mail-order deli food. That's why both Lindsay and I were captivated by Aunt Doris's home-style cooking. Lindsay snorts derisively at our mom, who averts her eyes. It's ridiculous for someone who lives off chefs' cooking to demean chefs. Ugh. It'd be far more beneficial for everyone if I gave my spot to someone who truly wants to be a doctor. That's just a bunch of nonsense. Besides, Mom and Dad, you don't know. My sister has always been much more academically successful than me. What? Our parents are dumbfounded. That can't be. Do you even know which university your daughter attends? That is. Our parents look at each other. You don't know, do you? You don't know about her school or that the architecture department is filled with talented people. Being able to attend a prestigious state university's architecture program without your help definitely means she's academically excellent. Ugh. It's a bit exaggerated to say I'm more successful than Lindsay, but the fact that I became a top student thanks to Aunt Doris is true. Right, Dad never came to a single parent-teacher conference, so there's no way you'd know how good my grades were and how well regarded I was at school. The momentum is gone, and our parents fall silent. I look at them with cold eyes. The one who succeeded in raising us isn't you, it's Aunt Doris. Lindsay laughs in disbelief. That's impossible. How could that be? Don't worry. I'll manage the tuition myself, and I've already found a place to live alone. I've even moved out my stuff. You didn't notice, did you? No way. As the blood drains from our parents' faces, which had been so red with anger, Aunt Doris looks on with utter disdain. Really, my brother was only interested in your grades. Such good kids, yet you never really saw who they are. Damn. Our humiliated parents growl like dogs. It's a shame to be pitted by Aunt Doris, whom they've looked down upon all these years. But that's the truth. Our parents have no words to give back to us. Eventually, Lindsay escaped home that day with the help of a male friend and moved to a prefecture over 5 hours away by car. This wouldn't make our parents repent or give up on us. A while after I advanced to my second year, I was summoned by our parents. I adamantly refused the command to come home. Only bad feelings. We met at our parents' favorite restaurant. Aunt Doris came along, but our parents visibly grimaced at seeing her. Immediately upon sitting down, they laid out many brochures on the table, all from universities with medical schools. What is this? We'll let you retake the entrance exam for medical school. It's a good opportunity, right? We're giving you a chance to redeem yourself. Prove your sister wrong, who has always looked down on you. So that's their angle. Foolish. Truly foolish. But it's amusing, so I'll play along for a bit. That's fine. Really? I'm so happy. I could probably get into this university. So, Dad and Mom, you really cared about me all this time. I have to repay this favor. Dad looks happy and nods, while Mom's cheeks turn gentle. As if. I can't stop laughing at this nonsense. What's going on? Dad, you look so happy, I just had to laugh. As if I'd agree to such a proposal. It's my life, after all. What? Realizing they've been mocked, our parents' faces turn bright red. They're not nearly as smart as one would need to be to become a doctor. It's not that Lindsay looked down on me at all. It's you who have always looked down on us. Either way, I have no intention of retaking the medical school entrance exams. I say firmly, and a vein throbs on Dad's temple. Why don't you both understand the noble job of being a doctor? Is it your fault, Doris? Once again, Dad directs his anger towards Aunt Doris, who is truly foolish. Aunt Doris just gives a wry smile. Brother was always a bit slow, huh? What? Neither Ashley nor Lindsay misunderstand the job of a doctor, they just have other things they want to do. So, an architect, huh? Nutritionists and chefs, all jobs anyone can do. It's terrible to have a job anyone can do, isn't it? Huh? Startled by the unexpected voice, my dad turned around. There stood two men, both with impressive biceps and healthy tanned skin. Who are you? You just insulted an architect and his son. Huh? My parents were shocked. Then, Aunt Doris stood up and took the arm of one of the young men. This is my husband. Nice to meet you, brother. I'm David Brown. I've heard a lot about you from Doris. Oh, I see. Aunt Doris's husband smiled, showing his white teeth. Actually, Aunt Doris had been dating her husband, David, for 5 years, and they got married right after I turned 20. Despite telling them they didn't need to concern themselves with me, the stubborn and compassionate couple insisted on waiting until I was 20. Thanks to that, I got to interact more with Aunt Doris's in-laws and became interested in the construction industry. Naturally, my parents were taken aback by Aunt Doris's sudden marriage announcement and her husband's meaningful words. Then another man, Aunt Doris's father-in-law, also smiled warmly and started talking. Nice to meet you, Mr. Thompson. I run a construction business around here. Your daughter, Ashley, became interested in my work through Aunt Doris. She really has an eye for talent, your daughter. Oh, I see. I'm planning to retire from the field in a few years, so I was hoping Ashley would become an architect and join our company, learn the trade, and eventually take over. That's so presumptuous. Startled, my parents were met with a stern look from Mr. Brown. It's not presumptuous at all. You've never been interested in Ashley's life before. Trying to control her after her sister ran away, isn't that inhumane? How rude. What do you know, a stranger? Well, the world is full of strangers, isn't it? What? Mr. Brown looked around. Following his gaze, my parents' faces drained of color as they saw the cold stares of other diners at the restaurant. Naturally, with such a loud commotion. Everyone is disappointed. To think that Mr. Thompson, whom they trusted, would look down on his family and others. I'm not like that. As my dad trembled, his favorite dish was brought to the table by the restaurant's head chef. Mr. Thompson, I'm truly sorry. It must have been painful for you to eat food prepared by someone whose job anyone can do. No need to endure any longer. We can no longer welcome you here, and I will inform other restaurants as well. No, that's not it. People who need replacements won't be visiting your clinic anymore, so we won't come again. I'll make sure our acquaintances know too. The whole restaurant's eyes condemned my parents. Unable to bear it, they left without touching the served food or collecting the brochures, fleeing the restaurant. From then on, my parents never pushed me towards medical school again. However, for a while, they pleaded. Please clear up the misunderstanding. Apparently, the incident at the restaurant caused them to lose a lot of patients. The patient base was mostly older due to the long-established hospital matching the long-standing restaurant's clientele. Rumors spread among the elderly that that place has the worst doctor who looks down on patients, and patients moved to a newly opened hospital nearby. Moreover, the doctor there was not only skilled but also had a perfect personality, and no patients returned to the old, ill-tempered doctor. The hospital quickly went into decline, and my frustrated dad yelled at the staff, causing nurses and clerks to resign en masse. This only fueled rumors that that hospital has a terrible doctor's character. Short-staffed and without patients, keeping the hospital open was only deepening their financial losses. My parents thought clearing up the misunderstanding would bring everyone back, but once a bad reputation spreads, it's not so easy to erase. After all, the reputation was mostly true, so there was no need to clear it. There might be some embellished stories, too. It's said that my dad stood on a restaurant table and yelled, "This chef dares," forcing the chef to apologize. Although this didn't actually happen, I strangely have a memory of that scene. Eventually, my parents had to close the family-run hospital and faced criticism from relatives. Unable to withstand the humiliation, they sold their proud mansion and moved away to the countryside. Now that 5 years have passed, I'm an architect and I'm working at the construction company owned by Aunt Doris's family, just like I always planned. While I'm not yet able to draw brilliant blueprints like the president, I study hard for my dream. That dream is to design a diner run by my sister Lindsay and Aunt Doris. Moreover, Lindsay and I plan to offer the cafe as a children's dining hall once a week. Just as Aunt Doris saved us, we want to help the children too. That's the promise my sister and I made, with support from Aunt Doris and the whole team. I'm making the most of my days.
When my ideal home was finished, I was ecstatic about the impending start of a new life. I looked around our new house and thought about how we would live there. I was excited because there were a lot of things I wanted to start over. My in-laws showed up out of the blue. They remarked, "What an unreasonable daughter-in-law you are. We're going to make this our permanent home. Transfer your parents to a different location." "What are you saying?" Confused, I asked my husband. However, he groaned and stated, "That's the truth. I'll let your folks know." Before I could respond, my in-laws came inside. I inhaled deeply before asking, "Do you understand whose house this is?" in a composed manner. "I go by Donna. I work for a corporation and am 35 years old. James and I have been wed for 5 years. Despite just being 4 years old, our son Adam behaves like an adult because he was reared among adults. Being a parent is difficult, but I am happiest when I am with my son. But there's one thing that worries me. My aging parents endure leg and back discomfort. I talked to my spouse about the potential of moving home with my parents after giving it a lot of thought. That certainly raises concerns. Rewarding them for all that they have done for you would be a fantastic idea. Additionally, James remarked, "I see no problem with it if it makes you feel secure, Donna." "That's excellent." "James, thank you," I answered. I was happy to have married someone who was so compassionate, as my husband quickly acknowledged. I took the initiative to start making arrangements for me and my parents to live together. However, things did not go smoothly. The location of my parents' home is far from the city center, in the suburbs. Living there would greatly complicate transportation. To make matters worse, we couldn't drive to my parents' place, which made life there difficult. Since our son was growing up at the time, it was not practical for our parents to move in with us, since we were renting a furnished apartment fit for a couple. That plan was not workable. I thought for a long time before I had an idea. "James, I've changed my mind. What if we constructed a bigger new home? Maybe this is the right time to act boldly." My spouse accepted the proposal right away after hearing it. "It's a really good concept. Together, let us construct a cozy home and make ourselves at home." With my husband's blessing, we started getting ready for the new home. We got in touch with my parents first. My folks responded awkwardly when we spoke. "Donna, we don't want to burden you and your family. Our existing house will soon feel too tiny as Adam gets bigger." I told my reluctant father, now is the right time to build a house, considering the future. At last, my parents agreed after seeing that we weren't just being kind. It relieved me to see them content. After that, despite our hectic schedules, my spouse and I made multiple trips to the real estate agent. My parents would find it convenient if there was a hospital nearby, and it would be great for work if there was a train station nearby. It was advised to create a barrier-free atmosphere because of my parents' mobility concerns. We held numerous meetings and looked over a number of options after taking this guidance. "As long as we are with you and your family, that's enough, Donna," my parents answered when I asked if they had any preferences. My spouse also offered a few recommendations, so it wasn't all up to me, and the plan went well. I became more excited as the plans took shape. Eventually, everything was ready thanks to my husband's ideas, the real estate agent's recommendations, and information from the internet. I then gave the contractors the orders. At last, every preparation was finished. It was actually quite labor-intensive. There were numerous demands and requirements. It was really difficult to prepare while working, but James's suggestions were quite beneficial. We felt a sense of success, even though we were worn out from practicing practically non-stop. We were able to get the perfect layout and location with the help of our time and efforts. Waiting for it to be finished was all that was left to do now. Although it took time, just thinking about our new home made me excited and boosted my motivation at work. During those exciting days, my in-laws, having heard about the new house plans, frequently contacted us. It's been a while. I heard from James that you are building a new house. Is that true? Yes, that's right. It's scheduled to be completed by the end of the year. Oh, that's exciting. James has become so respectable and we are so happy. We'd love to hear more about the new house. So if you have time, please come visit us. Oh, okay, was the phone call from my mother-in-law. Amid our busy schedule, we had been delaying visiting my husband's parents, so we decided to visit them over the weekend. Immediately, my in-laws welcomed us warmly. Building a house is hard, but it's a fun experience. A home of your own is a dream come true. Congratulations, my father-in-law said. He was as happy as if it were his own achievement. I was moved and smiled. Thank you. It was certainly tough, but we are really looking forward to it. I want it to be completed soon, but I'm worried about mistakes, yet I'm thrilled about the new house. We were always excited and talked cheerfully. By the way, what's the layout like? Suddenly curious, my mother-in-law asked, clapping her hands. So, I showed the floor plan saved on my smartphone to my in-laws. It's quite a big house, isn't it? The number of rooms might be too many for just the two of you. My mother-in-law and father-in-law commented. We're considering living with Donna's parents. We also planned it to be spacious in case we have another child in the future. My husband replied. Surprised, my in-laws asked, You're going to live with Donna's parents? Yes, that's right. Donna's parents have been getting weaker, so we decided to live together. That's why we decided to buy a new house. I see, my mother-in-law said, noticing a change in the attitude of my father-in-law and mother-in-law. Thinking about it later, I realized that this topic might not be very appealing to them, so I decided to change the direction of the conversation. By the way, how have you both been feeling lately? Any changes? No, not really. Any problems? Yes, not much different from the last time we met. My in-laws answered like that. But when the conversation settled, we returned to the topic of the new house. But I want to know more about the new house. Which room will Donna's parents use? We're thinking about this area here, James answered honestly. However, when we talked about planning to live with my parents, my in-laws showed noticeable displeasure. They seemed dissatisfied with us prioritizing my parents. I felt a bit hesitant too, but there is no doubt that I prioritize my parents. The main reason for building the house is for them, and I hope my in-laws will understand that someday. However, it became clear that my in-laws were not that gracious. As time passed, the house steadily approached completion. Every time I visited the construction site, I eagerly awaited its completion while also spending busy moments paying attention to the details. My parents also visited the site several times, and I could see them filled with joy. Doing something for my family makes me realize again how rewarding it is for me too. However, there was one thing that worried me. Recently, James had been keeping close contact with his parents. He had started visiting his parents' home every weekend. James, are you going to your parents' house this weekend too? Yes, I am. You've been visiting more often recently. I'm trying to be a good son like you, Donna. Now that our new house's preparations have settled down, I should show my face during the holidays. That's nice. You're really kind, James. Maybe I should come along with you. Actually, I had some concerns about my in-laws. I was worried whether they felt neglected and if that had affected their health. I thought about helping out as well, not just leaving it to my husband. But he shook his head when I suggested it. I had my doubts about whether it was the right approach, but he said, "I'm enough by myself," and went to his parents' house alone. I told him that if he needed any help, I would join him, so I believed he would call me someday. I sent him off that day. Finally, our new house was completed, and the moving day arrived. We loaded our things into the car and headed to our new home. The new house was more beautiful and grand than imagined. I was so moved that I gasped. The new house of my dreams was completed, and I was thrilled about the new life that was about to begin. While looking over our new home, I imagined our future life. There were many things I wanted to start anew, and I was excited. In the spacious garden, we could invite my in-laws for a barbecue, and my son and husband could play there. It seemed my parents were stuck in traffic, and it would take them a while to come over. "You go ahead and wait inside," James suggested, but I wanted to enter the house together with them. I was about to reply, "No, I'll wait here," when suddenly my in-laws' car arrived. Why were they visiting? As I stared in surprise, my in-laws got out of the car with bright smiles. "This house is really magnificent. This beautiful home is something to be proud of." "That's right. It's a perfect house, meticulously planned together with Donna." My husband cheerfully responded to his parents' comments. "Really? Donna's sense has indeed been wonderful," my mother-in-law admitted. "Thank you," I replied as my in-laws hotly threw out those words. After thanking them, they began unloading heavy luggage from the car. I approached my in-laws in surprise and asked, "Please wait. What are these bags for? What are you trying to do?" To my question, my in-laws gave a shocking reply. "What do you mean? Of course, we are bringing these bags into the new house." "What?" I gasped in astonishment. My mother-in-law sighed and responded, "What an unreasonable daughter-in-law. We are going to live here from now on. Move your parents somewhere else." "What are you saying?" I exclaimed in surprise. My mother-in-law shook her head in disbelief and crossed her arms arrogantly. Normally, a daughter-in-law should respect her husband's family. That's why it's only natural for us to live in this new house. "That's out of the question. Hurry up and contact your parents. We need to put our luggage down, and we don't have time to attend to you," my mother-in-law declared hotly. Struggling to understand, I looked to my husband for help, but he responded without changing his expression. "That's the reality. I'll tell your parents that." "Wait a minute. What are you talking about? We built this house to live with my parents. Please don't be so selfish," I protested. My husband sighed in frustration. "Ah, you still don't understand. You should just serve me. Your parents will manage somewhere else." I clenched my fists in anger. My husband was already influenced by his parents. Perhaps until then, his true nature was not apparent, and it has only just become clear. "Stop standing there. Come help with the bags," his parents ordered and confidently proceeded into the house, even though I am the owner and had yet to step into the house. Their unreasonable behavior infuriated me. Wonderful. The decorations are beautiful and luxurious, with faces filled with joy. My in-laws inspected every corner of the house. My anger reached its peak, and I said to them coldly, "Do you understand whose house this is?" What caught me off guard was that while they were in a good mood, my in-laws turned to face my question. "Whose house is this?" "James's house, of course. You think it's a shared property between husband and wife? Such a presumptuous thought is inappropriate. It's audacious for you to claim the new house for yourself when you're being looked after by James." Both my father-in-law and mother-in-law criticized me harshly without giving me a chance to argue. It became clear at that moment that my in-laws were unaware of our financial situation. It seemed James had not explained anything to them. It's unnatural for a house built by James to be shared with his wife. Really, such a presumptuous daughter-in-law is rare. I pity James for having a wife and in-laws like this. My in-laws did not cease their critical words based on their misunderstanding. Finally, reaching my limit, I stared in sure plea at my husband and his parents. I understand your point. If it really comes down to you all living here, then I will need James to reimburse me for my investment in this house. At that, my in-laws tilted their heads in confusion. How much money did you actually contribute? The amount you're talking about must be trivial. Why are you making such a big deal out of it? They responded while bursting into laughter. I glanced at my husband, who remained silent, his mouth firmly shut. Filled with anger, I blurted out, "Why are you silent? You really have a lot of nerve. It's unbelievable that you would hide something so important." When pressed, my husband fidgeted and averted his gaze. At that moment, my mother-in-law intervened and demanded, "What are you trying to say?" My husband looked pale with fear. Realizing I couldn't expect an explanation from him, I decided to clarify myself. In fact, the funds for purchasing this house were all paid from my savings. Therefore, this house is technically mine. As I revealed this, I saw my husband's pale face. It was as if he had held his breath. I continued, "If you want to live here, you need to repay the $330,000 used to build this house immediately." My declaration shocked my in-laws, and they were left speechless. The next moment, they turned to my husband, pressing him in a panic. "James, is that true? Is Donna really the owner of this house?" Faced with their questions, my husband seemed to have no choice but to admit the truth. Looking slowly at my nodding husband, he explained, "Actually, Donna purchased this house. She is very capable and already holds a managerial position. Her salary is significantly higher than mine." "But James, you have been working at your current job for a long time, right?" "That's right. You graduated from a prestigious university. You should be earning a high salary," my in-laws insisted. My husband, having a high sense of pride, must have been spinning the story to suit himself. However, even he couldn't hide his disturbance under the relentless questioning from his parents. "Actually, I recently made a big mistake. I almost got fired, and my salary dropped to the level of a new graduate," my husband finally confessed. Shocked by this revelation, his parents were left speechless. "I can't believe that James would end up like this," my mother-in-law murmured softly. My in-laws quickly ran over to me. Their previous rude behavior seemed like a lie, and they apologized profusely. "Donna, we are truly sorry for what we said earlier," my in-law said. "Please, we apologize. Could you possibly allow us to stay here?" As I looked at them sternly, they both pleaded at once. Seeing this, my husband also became desperate and pleaded, "Please, it was wrong of me not to explain. Can you forgive us and allow us to live here?" Responding with a calm voice beyond anger, I said, "No matter what you say now, I cannot forgive you. This house was purchased to live with my parents. If that cannot be fulfilled, there is no point in buying it. If you insist on staying here, you must immediately pay $330,000. "How can we possibly come up with such a huge sum?" my in-laws responded. "Then you must leave," I stated firmly. When I refused, my in-laws began to cry and clung to me. "Please don't say such things. We've sold our home and have nowhere else to go. Donna, please forgive us. Please allow us to live here with your parents too." Unbelievable. A household where a couple lives with both sets of parents is unheard of. No matter the reason, it's impossible. If you've sold your house, you should use the proceeds to find another place to live. As I declared this while looking down on them, they began to cry simultaneously. My father-in-law pleaded with a trembling voice, "To tell the truth, I've recently made huge debts through investments and gambling. We've used up the proceeds from the sold house and the retirement money, and now we have absolutely nothing left. We're retired, can't find work, and my wife has never worked outside the home. You're all we have left, Donna." Their expectations were clear, But this situation stemmed entirely from my father-in-law's actions and has nothing to do with me. You should rely on your proud son. I have no obligation to support you financially, so unfortunately, I cannot help. However, we are legally a family. Remember that regrettably, it is impossible to continue living with disrespectful parents and a husband who neither prevents illegal occupation of my property nor stops demanding it. Therefore, I have decided to divorce James. At my firm declaration, my husband weakly pleaded, "Wait a minute. Divorce isn't something you can just decide like that. Please don't say such things, Donna. I'm sorry, but I've reached my limit. Please leave this house immediately." Faced with the possibility of divorce, my husband was clearly shaken. Along with his parents, he repeatedly pleaded, but my decision was firm. I cannot tolerate them staying in our house without permission for an extended period. If you continue to stay, I will call the police. My firm declaration made my in-laws choose to leave the house hastily. Nevertheless, my husband argued, "Legally, I am still your husband and have a right to reside here." But I could not accept his claim. "If you continue to stay here, I am prepared to take legal action and have you removed. Are you really okay with that?" During this conversation, our son, who had been napping, woke up and entered the room. Then he unexpectedly said, "If it goes to court, Dad will be in a really tough situation." Hearing our son's innocent remark, my husband must have felt even more anxiety and desperation. Already at risk of being fired due to mistakes at work, the potential of getting involved in a legal battle greatly increases his chances of dismissal. Quickly grasping this harsh reality, my husband, with a pained expression, hurriedly gathered his belongings and quietly left the house. Just after that, my parents arrived for a visit. Noticing that my husband was nowhere to be seen, my parents were initially shocked. As I explained everything that had happened, they gradually showed warm smiles and expressed their gratitude. "You've stood up so strongly for yourself. Thank you. We're proud of you. You are a wonderful daughter," they said. Hearing their words, I felt a release from the anxiety I had been carrying for a long time and finally regained peace of mind. I had hoped that my husband would understand and accept the situation, but that was a wish unfulfilled. Perhaps escaping from a family that belittled me before things escalated further was actually a stroke of good fortune. The in-laws who had insulted me called repeatedly a week after I drove them out, but I decided not to respond to any of their attempts. According to some information, after losing their home, my in-laws are barely surviving in a poor-quality apartment. My marriage to my spouse eventually came to an end, and the divorce was sealed. He was transferred to a new area and is currently leading a difficult new life as a result of his employment failures. Meanwhile, I'm genuinely thrilled every time I see my folks basking in the sun in our large new backyard. Even though things didn't go as planned, as a single mother, we are content and tranquil in this lovely home. I'm starting over, and I firmly believe that this stress-free setting will be far superior to co-parenting with my former spouse for raising my child. I'm determined to put in all effort till my son matures into a respectable adult.
"You're joking, right?" My voice cracked as I stared at the statement on my phone. Every penny I'd spent years saving for a down payment, gone. Where's my money? Maria, my mother, didn't even bother looking up from her coffee. "Oh, relax, Juliana. It went to something important." "Important?" I nearly choked. "It's all gone. Where did it go?" She glanced at Greg, my stepfather, who sat next to her with a smug grin, swirling his coffee like we were having a casual chat. "The party," Maria said, her tone dismissive, as if she'd just explained where the car keys were. "We needed a little extra to make it special. You used my savings to pay for your anniversary party." My hands trembled as I clutched the phone. "That was for my house. You had no right." Greg chuckled, finally chiming in. We're your parents, he said, leaning back. We don't owe you anything, Juliana. Families share. You'll get over it. My name is Juliana, and for as long as I can remember, my mother and stepfather have treated me like a second-class citizen in my own family. My dad died when I was 12, leaving behind not just a void in my life, but a modest inheritance he'd hoped would give me a head start in adulthood. He trusted Maria to handle it until I was old enough to use it responsibly. Instead, she treated it like a family piggy bank. For years, I stayed quiet, letting little infractions slide. I didn't say much when she dipped into the fund for emergencies or used it to cover Greg's credit card debt. But this time was different. This wasn't a couple $100s here and there. It was my entire down payment, nearly $25,000, blown on catering, decorations, and some overpriced venues so they could show off to their friends. I wasn't just angry. I was heartbroken. I'd worked so hard to save that money, working extra shifts, skipping vacations, even living in a smaller apartment just to scrape together every dollar. And now, in one selfish move, they'd taken it all away. I want it back, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. You're going to pay me back every cent. Maria rolled her eyes, setting her mug down with a clink. Don't be so dramatic, Juliana. It's not like you're homeless. You can always save more. It's not about that, I snapped. It's about the fact that you stole from me. That money was mine. Greg smirked, clearly enjoying the show. Technically, it was your dad's money, and we're your parents. We're the ones who decide what's best for the family. The word family hit me like a slap. For years, they'd used that word to justify everything, from borrowing money without asking to dismissing my feelings whenever they crossed the line. But this wasn't family. This was theft. I'm not letting this go, I said, my voice trembling with rage. Do what you have to, Maria said with a shrug, picking up her coffee like she hadn't just ripped my dreams away. But don't expect us to apologize. We did what was necessary. I left their house that day shaking, the air in my lungs thick with frustration. Elena, my best friend, was the first person I called. I spilled the whole story, pacing my tiny apartment as the reality of what had happened sank in. They're unbelievable, she said, her voice full of disbelief. How could they think this is okay? Because they don't care, I said bitterly. They've never cared. As far as they're concerned, I'm just a backup plan, something to use whenever it's convenient. What are you going to do? She asked. I didn't have an answer yet. Part of me wanted to scream at them until they understood how much they'd hurt me. Another part wanted to crawl into bed and pretend none of this was happening. But the strongest part, the part my dad raised to stand up for myself, knew exactly what needed to be done. I'm going to get my money back, I said, my voice firm, even if it means calling the police. By the time I hung up with Elena, my anger had crystallized into determination. I wasn't going to let this slide. Not this time. My parents, no, Maria and Greg, had crossed a line they couldn't uncross, and I was done playing the role of the dutiful daughter who kept quiet for the sake of family. They stole from me. It was time to show them there were consequences. The next morning, I called the bank to confirm what I already knew. Maria had accessed my savings account using an old joint authorization she'd somehow convinced me to keep years ago, just in case. She transferred every last penny out 2 weeks before the party, with no intention of telling me. That's not legal, right? I asked the bank manager, my voice shaky but firm. It's a gray area, he admitted, his tone cautious. Since it was a joint account, she technically had access. But given the circumstances, it's worth pursuing legally, especially if the funds were earmarked for you. Thank you, I said, jotting down the details he provided. I'll be in touch. My next call was to Chloe, a lawyer Elena had recommended. Over coffee that afternoon, I explained everything. The savings account, the stolen money, and Maria's unapologetic response. Chloe listened intently, her pen flying across a notepad as I spoke. This isn't just unethical. It's potentially criminal, she said once I finished. Even with joint access, There are limits to what she can do with those funds, especially if you can prove they were specifically intended for your use. I nodded, hope flickering to life for the first time since this nightmare began. So, what's my next step? First, we'll file a report with the police to establish a paper trail, she said. Then we'll draft a formal demand for repayment. If they refuse, and something tells me they will, we can escalate to legal action. The thought of involving the police made my stomach churn. But when I thought about the hours I'd spent working overtime, the vacations I'd skipped, and the sacrifices I'd made to save that money, my resolve hardened. Maria and Greg thought they could walk all over me because I was their daughter. It was time to prove them wrong. Filing the police report was both nerve-wracking and oddly liberating. Sitting across from the officer at the station, I recounted the entire story, showing him copies of the bank statement Chloe had helped me pull together. So, your stepmother accessed your account without your consent and used the money for personal expenses? The officer summarized, his pen poised over the form. Yes, I said, my voice steady. She used it to pay for a party. I had no idea until after the fact. He nodded, jotting down notes. This falls under unauthorized use of funds, given the circumstances. We'll open a case and follow up with your parents. You'll want to let your lawyer know so she can coordinate on her end. As I left the station, I couldn't help but feel a small sense of satisfaction. For once, I wasn't letting them get away with it. The fallout began 2 days later when Maria called me, her voice tight with anger. "What the hell is this?" she demanded. "The police just showed up asking about your precious savings." "It's exactly what it looks like," I said calmly. "You stole from me, so now you're dealing with the consequences." "Stole?" she scoffed. "Don't be ridiculous, Juliana. We're family. That money was for all of us." "No, it wasn't," I shot back. "It was for me. Dad left it for me, and you had no right to touch it." Greg chimed in from the background, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, come on. Don't tell me you're taking this seriously. What are you going to do? Take us to court?" "If I have to," I said. "You brought this on yourselves." Maria let out a bitter laugh. "You're being dramatic. Do you really think this is going to get you anywhere?" "We'll see," I replied before hanging up. Meanwhile, Chloe was working behind the scenes to prepare for the next step. She'd already sent a formal demand letter to Maria and Greg, outlining the amount they owed and giving them a deadline to repay it. As expected, they ignored it. "They're doubling down," Chloe said during one of our meetings, "which is exactly what we want. The more resistant they are, the worse it'll look for them if this goes to court." "And if they refuse altogether?" I asked. "Then we escalate," she said simply. "But don't worry. You're in a strong position. Between the police report, the bank records, and your father's will, we've got more than enough to back up your case." Her confidence bolstered mine. For the first time in years, I felt like I had the upper hand. Maria and Greg had always treated me like I was powerless, but now I was proving that I wasn't. The final straw came when Greg posted a smug photo from their anniversary party on social media, complete with a caption thanking their friends and family for making the night so special. The image of him raising a champagne glass, standing next to Maria in her rented designer dress, made my blood boil. They were still reveling in their victory, blissfully unaware of what was coming next. "Enjoy it while it lasts," I muttered to myself, saving the photo as evidence. When I showed it to Chloe later that day, she shook her head, a wry smile tugging at her lips. "They're making this way too easy," she said. "Let's make sure that champagne toast is one they'll never forget." It was a week later when the fallout finally came to a head. I was sitting at my kitchen table, sipping coffee, when my phone buzzed. It was Chloe. "They've been served," she said, her voice crisp with satisfaction. "The demand letter is now officially part of the case file, and the police are following up with a formal notice of investigation." I leaned back, feeling a mix of relief and anticipation. "How do you think they'll react?" "Oh, they'll panic," Chloe said. "And when people panic, they either double down or crumble. Either way, we win." Sure enough, Maria called me later that day, her tone frantic and defensive. "Juliana, what are you doing?" she demanded. "You're really going through with this? You'd put your own family through the legal system over a little misunderstanding?" I took a deep breath, keeping my voice calm. "This wasn't a misunderstanding, Maria. You stole from me. And if you thought I'd just let it slide, you were wrong." "We didn't steal," she shouted. "We borrowed. It was for the party. You should be proud we could celebrate as a family." I couldn't help but laugh, the sound bitter and sharp. "Celebrate? You mean flaunt my money in front of your friends, while I'm stuck scrambling to rebuild my savings? No, Maria. That's not family. That's selfishness." Greg grabbed the phone from her, his voice oozing with condescension. "You're blowing this out of proportion, kiddo. Nobody's going to side with you on this. We're your parents. We've sacrificed for you. Don't you think you owe us a little gratitude?" "Gratitude?" My voice cracked, anger bubbling to the surface. "For what? For taking what wasn't yours? For mocking me when I asked you to pay me back? No, Greg. The only thing I owe you is accountability. And trust me, you're about to get it." That evening, the police knocked on their door. Chloe had warned me not to expect fireworks. It wasn't an arrest, just a formal inquiry. But I couldn't help imagining their faces as the officers explained the seriousness of the situation. Sure enough, Maria called me again, this time with a completely different tone. "Juliana, please," she said, her voice shaking. "You didn't need to bring the police into this. We can talk about it, figure something out." "We tried talking," I reminded her. "You laughed in my face and told me to get over it. Now it's out of my hands." Her voice cracked. "This could ruin us. Do you really want to do that to your own mother?" The irony of her words hit me like a slap. Your own mother. As if she hadn't already ruined the trust between us. As if her actions didn't scream that she cared more about appearances than about me. "I didn't do this to you," I said quietly. "You did it to yourself." A week later, we were sitting across from each other at a mediation table. Chloe sat by my side, her presence steady and reassuring, while Maria and Greg fidgeted in their chairs. They looked different now, less smug, more uncertain. The reality of their situation was finally sinking in. The mediator, a calm, middle-aged man with glasses, cleared his throat. "We're here to discuss the unauthorized use of Juliana's savings account and determine an appropriate resolution. Juliana, would you like to begin?" I nodded, my voice steady as I laid out the facts. That money was meant for my down payment on a house. I spent years saving it. Maria and Greg emptied the account without my knowledge and used it to pay for a party. When I asked them to pay me back, they refused and mocked me. I'm here to get what's mine. Maria tried to interrupt, but the mediator held up a hand. "You'll have your turn, Mrs. Grant." She sank back in her chair, her face tight with anger. When it was her turn to speak, Maria's voice was shaky but defensive. "We didn't mean any harm. We thought it was better for the family to celebrate. Juliana's young. She has time to save more. We didn't realize she'd take it this far." "You didn't realize?" Chloe cut in, her voice sharp. "You drained her account without permission and then dismissed her concerns. That's not a misunderstanding. That's theft." Greg opened his mouth to argue, but one look from the mediator silenced him. "Let's stick to the facts," the mediator said. "Based on the evidence, it's clear the funds were intended for Juliana's use. Mrs. Grant, Mr. Grant, you have two options. Repay the full amount immediately, or face a civil suit, potentially accompanied by criminal charges." Maria's face turned red, her composure cracking. "We don't have that kind of money lying around," she snapped. "We spent it on the party." "Then you'll need to figure out a way to repay her," the mediator said firmly. "Otherwise, we proceed with legal action." For a moment there was silence. Then Greg leaned forward, his voice low. "What if we agree to a payment plan?" Chloe raised an eyebrow. "That's a start," she said. "But Juliana has the final say." I looked at them, seeing not the untouchable figures of authority they'd always tried to be, but two flawed, selfish people scrambling to avoid the consequences of their actions. A payment plan is fine, I said finally. But I want it in writing. And if you miss even one payment, the deal's off. They nodded reluctantly, their bravado completely gone. As we left the mediation room, Chloe put a hand on my shoulder. You did good, she said. They won't forget this. Neither would I. The mediation agreement was signed that same day, and as I walked out of the building, I felt a weight lift off my chest. It wasn't just about the money anymore, though getting it back was a relief. It was about standing up for myself. For years, I'd let Maria and Greg take advantage of me, convincing myself that it was easier to stay silent. But not this time. This time, I'd made them face the consequences, and they couldn't wriggle out of it. Chloe met me at the door, holding a copy of the agreement. They'll be making monthly payments directly into your account, she said, giving me a proud smile. If they so much as miss one, we're ready to file a lawsuit. Thanks for everything, Chloe, I said. I couldn't have done this without you. You did the hard part, she replied. I just made sure the system worked for you. The first payment came through a week later, and while it wasn't the full amount, seeing even a fraction of my savings back in my account was like a balm for my anger. Elena came over that evening to celebrate, bringing takeout and a bottle of wine. To never letting anyone walk all over you again, she said, raising her glass. To finally standing up for myself, I replied, clinking mine against hers. As we talked, I realized how much had changed in the past few weeks. For so long, I'd put Maria and Greg's needs ahead of my own, convincing myself that family obligations outweighed my feelings. But this experience had shown me that boundaries weren't just important, they were necessary. If I didn't protect my own interests, no one else would. Maria called a few days later, her tone hesitant and unusually subdued. Juliana, I wanted to check in, she said, as if we hadn't just been through a legal battle. I let her words hang in the air for a moment before replying. Is this about the payments? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. No, she said quickly. I just wanted to see how you're doing. I didn't believe her for a second. She wasn't calling out of concern. She was calling because she didn't know how to handle the new dynamic between us. For the first time, she couldn't guilt or manipulate me into giving her what she wanted. I'm doing fine, I said, and I expect the next payment on time. There was a pause, and then she sighed. We're family, Juliana. I hope one day you can forgive us. I didn't respond to that. Forgiveness was a long way off, and it wasn't something she could demand just because it suited her. I have to go, I said, ending the call before she could say anything else. Over the next few weeks, I started to rebuild, not just my savings, but my sense of self. I adjusted my budget, picked up a few extra shifts, and focused on the future. The dream of buying my own home was still alive, and while Maria and Greg's payments weren't enough to cover everything, they were a start. Every time a payment hit my account, it felt like a small victory, a reminder that I had taken control of my life. It wasn't about revenge. It was about justice, about proving to myself that I was stronger than the people who had tried to take advantage of me. And I was. Months later, as I scrolled through real estate listings, I felt a flicker of hope I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time. The savings were growing steadily, partly from my own hard work, partly from Maria and Greg's payments. While the process was slower than I'd planned, the goal of buying my own home was back within reach. I smiled as I bookmarked a listing for a small but charming house on the outskirts of town. It wasn't extravagant, but it was mine, or at least it would be soon. And this time, no one would take it away from me. Maria and Greg continued their payments, though not without the occasional grumble. They'd tried to negotiate for lower amounts, citing financial strain, but Chloe had shut them down each time. The terms were clear, and any deviation would result in immediate legal action. They had no choice but to comply. I didn't hear from them often, which was fine by me. When Maria did call, it was usually under the guise of checking in, though her real motive was always clear. We've learned our lesson, she said during one call. her voice strained. I hope we can move past this someday. I didn't bother sugarcoating my response. Moving past this starts with you taking responsibility, Maria. And that means finishing what you started. There was silence on the other end before she muttered a curt goodbye. I hung up, feeling no guilt. For the first time, I wasn't bending over backward to make someone else feel better at my expense. It was freeing. Elena and I celebrated my progress one evening over dinner. As we clinked glasses, she said, "You know, I've never seen you like this, so confident. It looks good on you." "Thanks," I said, smiling. I guess I finally realized that standing up for myself doesn't make me a bad person. It just makes me... me. "And you are pretty awesome," she said with a wink. We laughed, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The betrayal, the anger, the fight, it had all been worth it. Not just to reclaim my savings, but to reclaim my self-respect. A few weeks later, I drove by the house I'd bookmarked. I parked across the street, imagining myself inside, filling it with my things, my life, my future. It wasn't just a house. It was a symbol of everything I'd worked for and everything I'd overcome. As I sat there, I thought about my dad. He'd worked so hard to provide for me, to make sure I had a foundation to build on. Maria and Greg had tried to take that from me, but they hadn't succeeded. I knew he'd be proud, not just of the house I'd soon own, but of the strength I'd found in myself. I took a deep breath and smiled. This was my life, and it was finally mine to build.